Welcome back, everyone. Moving into an office space can be an extremely intimidating process for a new business owner. So we're extremely excited to have Lauren Wilson of SVN Vanguard on this episode, where she's going to talk to us about all the things we need to know getting started and evaluating a new space. We'll see you in there. Welcome back, everyone. We are here with Lauren Wilson of SVN Vanguard Commercial Real Estate. Really excited to talk to you, Lauren. We are going to dive into basically getting into your first office space, which I know is something that is really intimidating, thinking about expanding and all of the challenges that come into it. So thank you so much for being here.
Definitely. I'm excited to be here today. Thanks so much.
Yeah, and so at this point, just to kind of set the ground for you where enrollees are, we're at a point now where things are starting to click, right? And we're thinking about now moving into an office space, no more just work from home if we haven't already. And so one of the things I thought would be helpful is kind of that typical progression is figuring out, do I go shared space or do I go full-blown office space?
Definitely.
And are there good rules of thumb to be thinking about through that process?
Yeah, so when you are a business owner and you're looking for space, the first kind of moment when you jump in, I'm guessing you're looking on LoopNet, you're looking on Craigslist. You don't exactly know what you want in the beginning, but you know that you either want an office space or you want to go into a shared space, but you're kind of putting everything on paper. I talk to a lot of clients in the beginning. They're saying, yeah, I know I want to jump into an office space. I don't know how much space I need. I don't know exactly where I want to be. I'm just trying to figure it all out and navigate this process.
Yeah.
So I think initially, the first thing I always recommend is syncing up with a commercial real estate broker.
Okay, absolutely.
Someone who is a tenant rep broker who specializes in working with tenants to find space that fits their requirements, essentially.
Okay.
So first and foremost, find a broker who you feel comfortable working with.
Who's done it before.
Exactly. Especially if you can find a broker who's working in the area or the market that you're specifically interested in. Once you kind of key up with a broker, the next step is identifying the spaces, the requirements that you need. So I know you mentioned that you were questioning shared space.
Yeah, or the full one.
Yes, exactly.
And I think in some of that space, right, it's like, okay, is some of it appearance only? Like there's a professional aspect to having your own office space, and especially if you're in a service-based business, bringing people in. But then there's also obviously the cost effectiveness of the shared space and maybe the collaboration opportunities. So I'm always curious, like, how do you balance that line, or maybe some things to be thinking about as you're starting that?
And I think it depends on the business that you are running, or if you're doing freelance work. I think the advantage of being in a shared space is kind of that synergy that you have. You're amongst other people that are maybe starting out. You also have a number of amenities. The cost might be a little bit lower than investing in an office lease, for example. But you kind of got to think about, are you welcoming clients into this space? I mean, what is your business? Are you seeing clients regularly? Are you adding on employees? I mean, you really got to figure out what size your business is first before you're justifying between a CoWork space and an office space.
And you just led to a point that I think is really critical, but at what stage, I think, especially as we think about hiring, right, and growing and our business thriving, at what point does it really make sense to move into that office space? And specifically, are there certain thresholds, office space per employee or something like that are helpful to be aware of, where you can start thinking about moving in and making that leap?
Yeah, and I think it all comes back to your business planning and forecasting. You need to know, can you afford this rent per month first before you even get to the moment of thinking, how much square footage do I need per employee?
Perfect, yep.
But once you're forecasting your business plan, you know in mind that you can pay $2,500 potentially in rent per month. Then you need to be looking at, you need to be looking at the size of the space, and also kind of considering what's going to be going on in my space. Am I going to be seeing clients? Do I need a meeting room essentially, or do I need space for my employees? We're typically looking at about, I would say, 150 to 175 square feet per employee.
Okay.
But again, that depends on the industry.
Yeah, and what you're looking to accomplish.
Exactly. If you're working in more tech we're seeing even closer to 100, 120 square feet per person.
Okay.
And this has been decreasing over time, I'm sure. I mean, back in like the 80s and 90s,
people
we were
doing more with less.
Double, for, huge filing cabinets and
Good
big
point. Yeah, there was a lot
equipment.
of wasted space, I guess, back then.
And that's always something I recommend to my clients is think about what kind of space you need, because you don't necessarily need a 1,500 square foot office space if you're going to be just you and 2 employees in the beginning.
Great
However,
point.
There's a lot of potential for growth. You want to think forward and you want to consider, okay, am I going to look for a space that's maybe 800 square feet or so with the potential to grow or an option to extend my lease? I mean, there's so many different...
That was one of the things I wanted to touch on, because I know, one of the things that excited me about getting the opportunity to talk with you is you're a business owner as well as an agent. And so you've been through that process before from that lens.
Firsthand.
How do you walk that line of, okay, and let's assume they've connected with someone like me, they're going through their finances and they understand exactly what they can afford.
Okay.
But now they're thinking, okay, I can afford this, but I'm moving into a place almost in the back of my mind, knowing I'm probably going to be outgrowing it pretty quickly. So maybe any tips on how to, maybe it just is what it is, but is there anything that they could be thinking about as that happens?
Yes. So when you're working with a commercial real estate broker, you can kind of lay it out and say, okay, I know that in 2 years, I'm going to maybe double the size of my company.
Okay.
So it would be good and ideal to be looking out for landlords that will accept leases that are maybe 1 to 2 years with the option to extend. So maybe you have a 1-year option to extend, or maybe 2 1-year options to extend that lease with the same terms and conditions. But it really depends on the space and
so you're giving yourself a lot of flexibility
exactly.
At that point.
If you're working a franchise, for example, and you know your business plan, you know you're not going to outgrow that space, you're more likely to sign like a 5-year lease with a 5-year option or even a 10-year lease, because you know you can kind of project your growth and you understand the space requirements that you need for that business.
That makes sense.
It depends. Again, it depends.
No, but I mean, that is really helpful. And so I'm just even thinking of a lot of the P&Ls that I've seen, or profit and loss statements that I've seen. And so I feel like on average, I'm seeing rent like around 5% of revenues. Is that like a key threshold that you're trying to maintain typically from a financial statement?
Yeah, I would say to 5-10% of your revenues.
So that's a really helpful threshold, I think, for business owners to have in mind. 5 to 10%, obviously. I love to keep that on the lower end, but that's going to be a real sweet spot for where rent is going to be affordable for the business to handle. But what goes into that number? What is actually making up, the rent payment that an owner should be aware of?
Exactly. So I have clients coming to me sometimes and they say, okay, I can afford this amount, X amount per month. This is what I want to keep my budget in.
It's like their rent payment they're probably relating it to, right?
Exactly. And so they'll see on brochures or maybe online, this space is, $1,500 per month. But you also need to account for the extra expenses. So a lot of the time you'll see this base rent amount.
Okay.
But until you're like looking at that lease and you know what type of lease you're getting involved in, you really don't know what expenses in addition you'll need to pay to that base rent. So you're either going to be looking at, there's usually 3 main types with office leases.
Okay.
You're going to be either looking at a gross or full service lease. Okay. So that's when you, as a tenant, are only paying your base rent. Now with a modified gross, you're paying your base rent, that amount that you'd usually see on a brochure and for their information, plus your proportionate share of expenses or operating expenses per your square footage in that space. So I know this is kind of getting a little bit more detailed.
And when we say operating expenses, I would imagine that's specific to the actual unit. So more like heat, gas, utility type of thing?
So for example, if you have an office space and you have multiple suites in one area and they're all on the same electrical meter. Yeah, so you're going to be billed proportionate to the share of square footage that you have within that space.
Got it, okay.
And that's going to depend how much you contribute back to the landlord on those expenses.
Okay.
So that's kind of a modified
That
gross.
makes sense.
Then you have a triple net lease, which usually you would see more in retail spaces.
Yeah, I think we hear that a lot.
Yeah, so triple net, that includes insurance, taxes, common area maintenance fees, and that's when a landlord passes those fees on to the tenant. So those are kind of 3 main ones I would say to just look out for, because when you're, putting together your budget or understanding what you're going to be paying per month, you might be paying probably going to be paying additional fees or expenses in addition to that base rent.
And I guess that leads me to another question. So I actually haven't seen this in a while, but I feel like my dad being in real estate, I remember hearing this.
Yeah.
And it was, the landlord's getting almost a percentage of sales as well. So percentage of revenue. Do we see that come up anymore? Has that gone away?
Sometimes.
Okay.
And that's a percentage rent lease.
Yeah.
I used to work, so previously in my job when I did leasing, I did more percentage rent leases.
Okay.
So a portion of their revenue would actually go back to the landlord.
Yeah.
You're not seeing that, I would say, in office
Okay.
spaces.
Yeah.
It's an interesting.
Yeah, I haven't run across it in a while, but I just remembered hearing it, and
Percentage
I guess it's probably good for the tenant that's gone away.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
would be an expensive proposition potentially.
Suggest not getting involved in any sort of leases like that for your first business.
Probably not ideal. So I just think to recap would be helpful. What were those three again? So
those
gross,
are gross,
modified,
full service, modified gross, triple net, just types of leases to look out for, especially when you're moving down this process and signing an LOI and a lease agreement.
Yeah, and again, ultimately, you're going to have a commercial agent like yourself walking you through this process, but I think it is helpful to have an understanding of what some of those terms are. Information is power type of thing.
Yes.
So I really appreciate that. Anything else that you think would be helpful on that?
Another thing to look out for with office leases, especially for a new business owner, is you might want to look for turnkey spaces. So these are a little bit different from the CoWork spaces that we kind of talked about previously, but these are spaces that might be smaller in square footage, but they're ready to go. So they have the fixtures in them, they have
great point.
Yeah, so like turnkey, open the door, ready to go. They might have the furniture in there, the desks, and it might help cut your initial costs that you have to pay for an investment to, purchase these items to place into your office space. So
that's a great point.
Again, you also have to think of the initial fees that you're going to be putting up to
that
build
furniture
out
can be
the
expensive.
office space. Sometimes the landlord might help negotiate improvements that they might put into the space, but you might be responsible for that as well.
Okay.
So again, something to consider when you're going down that route of getting office space. Are you going to be contributing to building out the space, or is the landlord going to be there?
And I imagine that's something that the agent is usually doing on your behalf, is negotiating some of these different components. So it's not like they're going to be going at this alone, but that's a big piece of your role, I would imagine.
Exactly. So going back to that importance of having representation in any sort of commercial real estate transaction, just to help you through that process and let you know what you need, what you should look out for, and helping you from site selection, finding a location, all the way to negotiating that lease and
actually
you
securing
into that
it.
space.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, this was really insightful for me, as someone thinking about expanding myself, and I can only imagine how valuable it was to everyone viewing, so thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much. Pleasure being here.
Huge thank you to Lauren Wilson for joining us. That was a lot of awesome information. Key takeaway, obviously this is not an area you want to DIY. It's important to work with a professional agent, but I also think it was extremely valuable to get some of the key insights Lauren was able to offer. Now that you can evaluate moving into a new office space and really making sure that your business is growing effectively. Thanks for watching Idea to Income. We'll see you in the next episode.